Welcome everyone to session 10 of the Veteran ETA Roundtable. Tonight we have Jed Morris with us speaking about what happens day one when you get the keys to the business after your acquisition. Before we do that, just want a quick disclaimer that none of this is legal or financial advice. Just so the lawyer in me has to say that. And I'm just going to introduce Jed real quick, and then I'm going to shut up because I want everyone to get the insights and hear Jed's journey to what he's doing right now, which is just terrific. So Jed Morris, he's the managing partner of Sunset Coast Partners. It's a privately held holding company that specializes in acquiring small landscape businesses in the Western United States. In addition to his role at Sunset Coast Partners, Jed serves as the president of Pacific Sunscapes, the premier provider of landscape construction, irrigation, and maintenance services in San Diego County since 1979. Jed served in the Air Force as a financial program manager for 10 years. His experience in the corporate sector includes positions as senior management consultant at Deloitte, site reliability engineer at Microsoft, and a senior technical manager at both AWS and HP. Jed has his MBA from NYU Stern School of Business and a Bachelor of Applied Science in Financial Management from Wayland Baptist University. And just some backstory, I think over a year ago, I reached out to Jed. Maybe 3 years ago, I reached out to Jed and was wanting to talk ETA, and he's one of those first people that hopped on the phone with me as a fellow veteran, and we had a terrific conversation. And he's just a wealth of knowledge. I highly recommend following him. He's just got so many great insights and is always a big proponent of helping and giving back to the veteran community and learning from his experience. So take it away, Jed.
All right, Charlie, thanks. That was an incredibly generous introduction, so I appreciate that. Start off right at the beginning and say, for those of you who don't know, I'm in Portugal right now. Recently moved here 2 months ago. So if the internet gets a little slow or a little dicey, we'll take a pause, let it catch up. Hopefully we won't have any issues. But I'll start off, do a quick overview of kind of like how I, did my search, found my way, bought my company, and then kind of like what's been happening after that. And I'll kind of try to focus post-acquisition as much as possible, since that's kind of the whole point of this session. So like many people, I kind of was tipped on to ETA following my MBA at Stern. Stern isn't really an ETA kind of school, but I caught a whiff of it, made my way to HBS for their conference, learned a lot, and then just spent a lot of time in 2022, especially, bouncing around the conferences, reading Buy Then Build, reading the HBS guide, doing all the stuff, newbies do. Figuring out whether I want to do a self-funded or raise a fund, all that kind of stuff. Ultimately decided self-funded was the way to go. And kind of, I'm somebody who I like to own my future as much as possible. And I started searching in 2022, right around October or so, looking specifically in defense and in tech. My background, obviously, from the Air Force is in acquisition, so I had a lot of experience in defense acquisition. Then my time at Microsoft, I understand how to code, so it kind of made sense. As I kept going, one thing led to another, and I accidentally met a gentleman in his 70s who owns a landscaping company in San Diego, which is super random. But I tell people it's kind of like when you decide to buy a car, and then all you see is that kind of car. Well, he came over, he gave me an estimate on a renovation, and one thing led to another. I'm like, why is this guy still working? We had lunch, agreed to a sale, and the reason I decided to go forward with it was because I realized that I had a lot to learn, and I wasn't willing to wait around 2-3 years for a search to do it, quote, the right way, just to learn all the same lessons. So I figured if I could start off, get my feet wet, get into it, figure it out as I go, that would make a lot more sense. So I decided not to do that, just to jump right in. And I negotiated for most of 2023, and then closed in November of 2023 on Pacific Sunscapes, which is a small installation construction landscape company in San Diego County. At the time, they were doing about 1.25 in total revenue, maybe 10% margins. But the truth is that they were so small, there was no business. It was a contractor with a team. And so there's no way to really know what the margins were. There was no EBITDA. They didn't even do accounting. They just threw all their money in a bank account and just kind of went from there. So I felt like it was a good opportunity just to kind of dive in and see what I could do. And I got a really favorable acquisition term because obviously the business itself in every objective measurement is unsellable. And so It was more of a retirement plan for the seller. So we basically did a gigantic seller's note. I gave him 50,000 down, and that was it, and just kind of took over. Now, one thing I found along the way is that once you make an acquisition, then word gets out really fast, at least in trades, that you're a buyer and you're a legit buyer. And so about 2 weeks before we closed in October, one of our competitors who had a commercial landscaping company reached out because, again, their owners were in their 70s, wanted to get out. And so we did a really quick negotiation and we closed on that one in November of 2023. So back-to-back acquisitions really, really quickly. And did all the due diligence myself with one lawyer in San Diego who was invaluable, but that was it. And so I felt like I was not necessarily qualified, but for the size of the companies and my experience, I was like, I could figure this out. And for the most part, I did. So bought both of these companies, immediately merged them together under the Pacific Sunscapes branding. And then that was as of December 1st, 2023. So we've been operating for about 7 months now. And it's been pretty crazy. And I say that because right now, if things continue, we're expecting to probably have around 2.8 million in total revenue by the end of this year, just off of regular organic growth. But the real crazy thing is that there is no business here when I bought it. So it's just a couple of teams running full speed with about maybe $2 million of recurring revenue. And we're building the business around it because the owners were essentially contractors and basically just running it themselves. Like you had an owner and a spouse just kind of doing everything themselves, no bookkeeper, no accountant. Their idea of bookkeeping was basically just printing off their bank statement, sending it to their tax attorney, and filing it that way. So it was very much bare bones. So the risk was always that we were going to build a business around kind of the activity that was already happening. So by definition, this flies in the face of the idea of don't break it. We always talk about how you want to buy a business that's already doing really well, or at least has a pretty consistent revenue, and you don't want to break the business early on. You want to kind of sit back and kind of learn how the business works, not move things too quickly. But right off the bat, we had a cash crunch like on day one. So I'm going to start off by I'm going to highlight a bunch of things that we did wrong and some learnings there, just so people can understand, because there's some things in here that I didn't know that I hope will be beneficial to you. So first and foremost, we closed and consolidated all the businesses on December 1st, 2023. On December 3rd, we got notified that there was an outstanding $70,000 payroll bill that we were liable for. Now, technically, we did asset purchases, and technically that's not our bill. But if we don't pay it, then basically all of our employees quit and walk away. And so what had been happening was that the previous seller of the commercial company had been using a payroll company in San Diego that they knew each other for 30 plus years. They'd been doing business together for a long time, and they had the landscaping company had fallen on hard times several times over their history. And over the course of 30 years, the payroll company had basically been forwarding them payroll, allowing them to roll their payroll forward. And so they did not disclose that in diligence, of course. And I did not find it because it never occurred to me that a payroll company would allow you to forward payroll, because that's insane. What we found is that basically once we took over, the payroll company reached out and was like, great, you're going to catch up payroll, right? That's 1.5 cycles of payroll, which for us is about $65,000 due day of, and then turn around and make normal payroll the next week of an additional 45. So it was like 100K out of the bank immediately. And that was terrible. That completely murdered anything we had for working capital, any extra personal savings I had put together. And I had raised 170K from friends, from veterans that I was served with, a couple business school colleagues of mine, and I kind of put that together. And I'd use that for due diligence and kind of a working capital fund. But this completely wiped it out. And so I basically had to suck it up, make the payments, keep the business running. But by the following week, we had less than 5,000 in the bank. And so we started off right from the beginning with a cash flow crunch. And if there's one thing I've learned over the last 7 months, is cash flow is king. It is amazing how just watching your cash flow is just the most important thing. Just getting your grips on cash. You got to know when it's coming in. You got to know when it's going out. And especially when you're starting off, like once you buy your business, even if you're not the guy who's like the CFO, even if things are running well, you have to know where every single penny is going on day one. Absolutely. Even if you don't plan on moving anything. because one, that's how you learn how the cash actually moves to the business, and two, you're gonna find out really fast where the kinks are. And so for us, essentially, I basically took over all the finances immediately, shut off all the bills. We were like, we're not paying any bills whatsoever. We closed all the credit accounts, closed all the debit accounts, canceled the bank account, created a new bank account just to make sure that there were no recurring bills that were going to hit our bank account, and basically started from scratch. And from there, we've just been slowly building back. And so I cannot emphasize enough that cash flow is the most important thing that you'll ever watch. And another thing, you know, when you're buying these types of businesses, especially if you're buying a trade business, and one that's been around for a long time, because that's what we always talk about, right? You're going to buy a trade business, you're going to buy one that's, enduringly profitable 30, 40 years. Well, a big part of that is digital transformation. If it's enduringly profitable, then that means the owner has been there for a long time and most likely is accepting checks, not credit cards. And they're most likely sending out paper invoices and snail mail. And you'll look at that from the outside and you'll think, wow, that's a great way for me to, bring value and upgrade. And that's true. But in the short term, that's a cash crunch because, if 70% of your customers are mailing you a check, you have no idea when that check's going to arrive. You have no idea if it's getting held up at the post office. And then even when it does arrive and you deposit in your bank account, if you're like us and you use Chase, they're not going to clear that check for at least another day, maybe 4, depending on who the writer of that check was. And so, if you're waiting for those checks to arrive, you can wait several days just to get them. You never know when they're coming, and then you'll never know when they actually clear the bank. So cash flow is key, and it will just destroy you right in the beginning. So all those things that you can change to help provide value, that's true, and that's what we're doing. But in the short term, they're major liabilities. So it's really important to understand that right from the beginning. A couple last things I'll touch on is now that I bought 2 businesses, we're in negotiations to buy a couple more. And it's amazing how fast word, like I said, when word gets out, like once the locals know that you're a buyer, and even if you're not interested in growing through acquisition, once people know that you've bought a business, then all of a sudden you become a candidate, and business brokers will find you, and other owners will find you, and word will spread through the grapevine because all the owners in an industry know each other because they know kidding went to high school together, and opportunities may come your way. But it's really important to remember that, as these things come together, like it's a very small industry and reputation is everything. And so a couple things to keep in mind is that, as we're growing, we all use the same suppliers and a lot of us are still in the same market. And so how you treat your customers and your employees is incredibly important. Especially your employees. We've been lucky enough that we haven't lost any of our employees since we took over. Not a single one has left, which is vitally important because, like I said in the beginning of this call, I'm in Portugal and I'm managing a landscaping company remotely from here. And if I didn't have a couple of, like, really 2, but 3 very competent managers that I could trust to manage the operations day to day, then I wouldn't even get a chance to turn the business around. And so I know most people are going to buy a business and they're going to be right there, in the office, in the thick of it. And that's how I was in the beginning too. But you have to remember that, your employers are the key because, if you're going to buy an HVAC company or a landscaping company, you're not an HVAC guy, you're not a landscape guy, and your employees have decades of experience. And so it's really important, just like when you're in the military and you get to a new unit, it's really important to swallow your pride, understand, where you bring value and where your people bring their value, and take advice where you can get it. The last thing I'll touch on before we just move on to like questions and stuff, because I don't want to just keep rambling, but the last thing I'll touch on is when you buy a business, it's amazing how much, at least for me, I didn't realize like the tangible value of owning it. Like the responsibility really does fall on you. And all the fantasies you have in your mind about like how you're going to run it, whether it's like, I'm going to do employee interviews, or we're going to, revamp our payroll, we're going to fix our digital transformation, all that kind of stuff. All that stuff's important, but it completely goes by the wayside when you're trying to make payroll. And one thing it took me a couple months to really get my feet under me about was when you buy your business, you have to remember that, like, now that you're the owner, you are the commander of your business. You're the commander of your unit. And business and capitalism is a battle. You are fighting every single day to stay alive. And that's kind of how it should be. And if you don't take full charge of like what's happening, the business will die without you. And so don't be afraid to jump in there and like really take over. And everything you've learned up until now, as far as like, what you read about in the HBS guide, what you read about in Buy Then Build, those are all really important things, but you have to trust your instincts, because just because the guide said, hey, don't change anything in the business for 1 year. Well, if your business is going to die next week because you don't have enough cash flow, then maybe you should do what you think is right. Because at the end of the day, if the whole thing fails, you're the one who lost the capital. So get in there and do what you need to do to be successful, and really trust yourself, because it's all up to you at this point. So if you're gonna fail, don't fail because you did it by the book. Do it because you did it the way you felt like you should do it. So anyway, I could go on and on, but again, cash flow is key. Watch your cash flow.
That's terrific. Thank you so much for walking us through, from beginning to kind of where you are right now. We have some questions in the chat, and I'll just kind of voice those now. So question from Travis, can you go through your current org chart, GMs, number of employees / teams? And one thing that I was thinking of as well, if you can follow up on, you mentioned how key these employees are. How did you kind of think about that as you're going through the craziness of trying to get the acquisition closed to keep those folks where they are and kind of keep those key men in place?
Yeah, great question. So right now we have about 35 employees. And I say about because we're always like off 1 or 2 laborers, depending on who's in. So we have about 35 employees. We are an S Corp, and I have a commercial maintenance branch that does about 50% of our revenue. So we service HOAs primarily in San Diego County. We have one general manager who runs that portion. And then we have another team of landscape installation, and they primarily do residential installation. So think like everything from retaining walls to like high-end renovation. And I've got another manager who runs that side. As far as the GMs go, I would not have bought these businesses if it wasn't for the GMs. The GMs are fantastic. On the installation side, Joe, he's been doing it for 25 years. Really great guy. I had several conversations with him before we closed, just making sure that we were on the same page as far as he was on board with what I had planned, and I was on board with his leadership style. It was really important for him to be able to maintain his autonomy with his team. And I'm like, fantastic. I want you to keep doing what you're doing. And then on the flip side, I got Gustavo on the commercial maintenance side, and he'd already been kind of operating the company for at least the last 6 or 7 years. He'd been with the company for 20. The owner had been largely out of the picture at that point. And so I basically just let him keep running the way he was running. And so if that wasn't the case, I would not have felt comfortable with moving forward with the acquisitions, because I knew that I had competent managers in place. We were on the same page, and we were on the same page as far as like the vision for the company moving forward. Without that, there's no way I would have taken the risk on it.
Perfect. I mean, maybe, I don't want to get too granular into the structure of your company, but did you consider, bonuses or any type of compensation to say, hey, like,
yeah,
you keep doing what you're doing, but also like, I appreciate you sticking with me and trusting with me. If you could speak to that kind of dynamic.
Yeah, that's a really great question, because, coming from tech, equity is a big deal. And so my first thought was like, especially these managers, I'm not too clingy with my equity. I'm like, if we're going to be successful, we're all going to be successful together. And so I offered them both 10% equity as long as they stayed with me for the next 3 years. That was it. And I gave them a sizable, pay bump, and then you gave them that 10% equity cliff. And what I found since then is that, and I really emphasized to them, was like, hey guys, you're owners. I want you to be a part of this. I want you to be successful. And that's great. But what I've really found is that they didn't value the equity. They still really don't. They want to see the business be successful, but it's amazing how lifelong employees just don't see the value in the equity. They really like the cash flow. They really like the increase in salary. But I would say that before you offer equity, just because it's a good deal, do a better job than I did of like just kind of talking about compensation first, and just kind of seeing what is it that your employees, or especially your key employees, what do they really value? Do they want a piece of the business? Do they just want a higher comp? No sense in giving away equity if they don't value it. So I would say, have that conversation.
Definitely. Okay. Great insights. Got a question here. Maybe you could speak to the first 90 days and kind of how you approach that through the like I said, the the craziness of getting through the transactions. Besides cash flow crunch, you encountered, what did you primarily set to tackle first? Tooth to tail ratio, how many office staff to actual landscapers, et cetera. You can speak to that.
Yeah, that's a great question because it's a water hose, and this is the part that they don't tell you. So the first business was a stock acquisition, so I didn't have to change a lot. We kept everything kind of running. But the second business that I bought, the commercial one, that was an asset purchase. So we basically bought all the assets, moved it into the stock business, and that's how the company's structured today. When you do that, especially if you do the asset purchase, it's not, they tell you have to do all this stuff: insurance, regulations, licenses, um, all of your registrations, your DMV records, your smog records, everything has to be changed. And not just that, not just changed now, like changed today, like changed immediately. And so it is an incredible amount of work. It is quite expensive, especially when you're changing all those insurance policies over. And it's something to not be taken lightly. Now, it's not going to be a recurring expense because you only have to really do it once. It's kind of like, when you get a new apartment and now you got to pay that 3-month advance, for your rent, and you got to pay extra for utilities, get everything turned on. But if no one tells you that, then that sucks. Especially if you're in a regulated industry. If your guys require a license to work, then there's a lot of things that are going to have to change. And liability insurance is a big one. And making sure you get all that stuff transferred over. It's not fast and it's not cheap. And your guys aren't going to stop working, to do all that either. So, and you most likely probably have one or two people in your admin staff at the most. So it really is you. It is you and maybe one or two employees that you can grab, and you're just going to go vehicle to vehicle, insurance policy to insurance policy. You're going to be doing the dumb things like I found that they were paying Cox Business Services $1,000 a month for phone service, which is insane. And so, like, just going through every single line item expense and canceling things that don't make sense, switching over licenses, switching over insurances, DMV records, it's a nightmare. You will get through it, but it's a lot of work and it happens all at once. And so first 90 days, that's like the first 14 days. So just be ready for that, and prepare for that as much as you possibly can. If you got a seller that you're working well with, then just kind of prepare for that as much as you can, just knowing that, hey, we're going to have to do a lot of transition, especially in those first few weeks. And then after that, it's really about just making sure that first and foremost, payroll is key. Guys have to get paid. And then after that, just try not to make as many waves as possible. Now, if you're like me and the life of the business, rests on you making a big change really fast, then do that. Do what you got to do to keep it alive. But outside of those mandatory changes like insurance and DMV and all that kind of stuff, I would really try to, just really watch the cash flow and just try to see how the cash moves in and out of the business. Everything from invoicing all the way to accounts receivable, because that's how you're really going to see, how the business functions and where the true bottlenecks are.
Terrific. All right. Well, I know I'm talking, but hey, just a reminder, if anyone wants to pop on and ask direct questions, that is definitely okay. So I don't want to hear myself talk too much this evening. As far as, you kind of mentioned some of the priorities, cash flow, admin, things of that nature. Other than kind of your natural kind of instincts and conversations with the seller, how did you start like that idea of was it a real formal process, or was it kind of just tackling the fish closest to the boat, or did you try to develop like a system to like, this is my priority now, and then I'm gonna kind of work through it slowly? I don't know if you could speak to whether there was kind of a more structured process, or you're just trying to put out fires for that first 90 days or how many days?
Yeah. So I came into it with a plan. The structure process was to kind of figure out how the cash flow works and then immediately move everybody from paper to digital as fast as possible. That was kind of my plan. Okay. That went to shit immediately, because it would just end up being like putting out fires every single day, because there were a lot of problems that I did not anticipate that just came out of nowhere and that ended up being life or death for the business. And so this is a good point here. And you may already realize this, but a business is the direct reflection of the owner, period. It always is. If the owner is ethical and has their shit together, then they may not be the best business guy or gal in the world, but you know that there's no skeleton in the closet. But the opposite's also true. If the owner is sketchy, then the business is sketchy. That is 100% true. And so the first owner of Pacific Sunscapes, wonderful guy. He was fantastic. He was incredible integrity, wonderful contractor, not a great businessman, but we were able to work together. Things were great. The second owner, completely shady. And the only reason I went through with it was because, one, I trusted the GM that I knew was going to stay, and two, I wanted the book of business. I'll just be honest with you. I wanted the book of business. And I was like, all right, well, he's shady, but I can get through that. And what I found was, not only is he shady, but he just, the equipment we were using was crap, and there's bills left all over the place. So there's a lot of work to get done. So I would say definitely just watch the things that are right in front of you, and sometimes you got to put out fires, but eventually you'll get your head above water.
Great. We got a question in the chat. Per the cash flow point, how do you extend the AP and shorten the AR when inheriting a new business, like just in a general sense?
Yeah. So step one is shorten the AR. Call your customers who haven't paid you and ask them to pay you. It's amazing how many people don't do that. Just call them. Just call them and ask them to pay you. So that's step one. And then step two is start implementing a new system or a new process just as you're watching how the cash flow works, and see where the kinks are. And so, for instance, we were running everything on paper, and as a result, we would mail out all of our invoices, and we'd have to wait for customers to get them. We'd have no ID confirmation if they received them. We have to wait for them to write a check. We have to wait for that check to return. Like, it's ridiculous. And a lot of our customers were 30 plus days in the past. So it was two things. So step one, call the customers, make sure that they have received our invoices and they're sending those checks. Swing by and pick up the check if you need to. If they're going to put it in the mail, no, I can come and get it today. It's fine. So shorten the AR as much as you possibly can. But then as you're going, start building in some systems that make more sense. So we've started putting in Aspire software, and just to help automate some of the invoicing. And we booted up QuickBooks almost immediately. So again, they weren't using QuickBooks either. So that's kind of crazy. But just getting some of those digital invoices in place. And now we've got, when I took over, 95% of our customers were paying by paper, by just checks in the mail. And now we've got that to only 65% are paying by checks in the mail. So, as you're building those things in, just start, say, hey, now we're offering an email invoice. And then you have the software in place. You can see if they read it. Then you can follow up with them immediately. Hey, did you get that invoice? Hey, I know you're used to sending a check. You can pay digitally on this link. And you're going to have a lot of weird conversations with people who are in their 60s and plus and say, I don't trust your web link. I think I'm going to get hacked. Have those conversations, just hold their hand, walk them through it, and do what you have to do. But it's just the grind. It's the follow-up work. It's making sure that you're implementing the systems that are going to make your AP go faster. And then when it comes to AR, call, follow up, do whatever you have to do to get those checks to arrive.
Terrific. And then just from a general like working capital stance, was that like a main touch point with the seller, or kind of how did you approach that? I know that you mentioned some challenges.
Yeah, that's another lesson learned. So small business owners don't understand the purpose of working capital. Some do. I'm just going to say that most don't, at least in my experience. And so even if I had working capital written into the LOI, I had working capital written into the purchase agreement, and then the day after, they put the working capital in the business, but they were under the impression that the working capital was to pay off what was left of their outstanding bills that the business owed them, not for the business to run. So for instance, if you have like a business credit card and you've been racking up, supply charges and stuff, their idea was like, oh, well, that money is supposed to pay off like, what's left of our debts. And I tried to explain to them, no, the working capital is in the business for the business to continue operating. And that's a really tough conversation to have. I realized that it was a misunderstanding, and I realized afterwards that I should have been more clear, and that's just a learning. And you don't realize that like the things that seem obvious to you, the things that you write in your LOIs, the things that you write down in your purchase agreements, just because they're there in plain English that you understand, that your lawyer understands, doesn't mean that the seller understands it unless they've verbally said that to you and voiced it back. And so I decided to let it go. I didn't pursue it. I was like, look, it's there. I'm going to let it go. To me, the relationship with the seller was more important than chasing them for $25,000, which was the working capital peg for the for that particular purchase agreement. So definitely don't assume that people know what you're talking about, even if you have it written in the contract.
Great. And we got another question. They're talking about life death decisions in the business. Did you feel like those were completely unknown and it was just something that came up and you had to adapt to, or were you able to sense some of them happening prior to and you kind of just took it and knew that you'd have to figure it out?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. So some of the things were unknown, such as I did not know that their payroll company was, floating their payroll. That was unknown. And so that was a huge hit to working capital. But then there are some things that you learn along the way, which is exactly why I wanted to jump in with both feet and be like, look, let's just learn today, right? And a couple of those things are, look, the business was doing payroll weekly. So every single Friday, the guys got a check and they love that. And, and I saw no reason to change that right off the bat. But then if you start looking at your cash flow and you realize, oh, well, if I'm paying payroll every single week, but all my customers are paying me by check and it takes weeks for it to arrive, I'm never catching up on my cash flow. I'm never going to catch up. The checks never arrive fast enough. And so that was a life or death situation that was not the fault of the sellers. It wasn't the fault of anybody other than the fact that, business operations were not correct. And so, it's a tough conversation when you have to tell 35 of your employees that, hey guys, we're no longer paying every week and we're not going to pay every other week. We're going to pay twice a month, because if we don't, the business will fail. So, because we have to have a little bit more time to make sure that we can collect some of that AR. And so, that's a tough change, but you have to make the call and then, do what you can to make sure that your team has time to absorb that ahead of time. Because again, most of your employees are living paycheck to paycheck and they rely on that stuff. So some of the issues, the life and death issues, were left over from the seller, but luckily I have a great lawyer and that's not going to impact us too bad. But the other stuff is it's just normal operations, and you're going to get in there and you're going to realize the way this business is built today won't allow it to live much longer if you don't make a change. And every business is a little different, but if you buy a business that's perfect, then I don't understand where you're going to build the value.
Terrific. I keep saying terrific because they're just throwing out so much great knowledge, and it's I think it's almost 1 o'clock in the morning in Portugal, so I don't even know how your brain's working right now. We got a good question here in the chat. If you had a crystal ball, what would you rather have? The same business, 5 million sales at the same margin, working capital plus cash cycles, or $2 million in sales with negative working capital and 30-day cash conversion cycle?
One, obviously, hands down. Absolutely number one. And the reason being is because, and this is actually pretty common, especially in landscaping. Sales are really important. And I say that because most businesses are run in a very inefficient manner. Whether it's because they're not operating the business correctly, or because their business processes are flawed, or there are no SOPs. And what I found is that 9 times out of 10, if you're going to buy a business, especially in landscaping, that has higher revenue and a terrible margin and terrible EBITDA, you can pull up that EBITDA pretty quickly, because there's a lot of waste. There's a lot of mismanagement. And so I'd much rather have option number one. But at the end of the day, it's just cash flow. I mean, it doesn't matter how big your sales are. If you run out of cash and don't make payroll, your team walks and you have no business. So, it doesn't really matter if you've got a $2 million business or a $5 million business or a $50 million business. If you miss one payroll, your business is over. So, yeah.
Great. And I think we have about 8 or 9 minutes. Oh, we got another. Why the move? And this is kind of one of my questions, because when we spoke, you got this young family, this new career. I mean, you have so much calm that I think a lot of other people would be afraid. And so why the move to Portugal? And what do you foresee as the biggest challenges to managing a business from Europe? And maybe if you could just touch on kind of the things behind the scenes that allowed you to succeed and to get through this, and kind of that whole dynamic of balancing this calculated risk with all the family obligations and everything that you're trying to accomplish in your life.
Yeah. So loved moving to Portugal. And this is actually a really interesting part is that, we were struggling quite a bit, whether it was with working capital, cash flow, all these issues we were running into. And I knew the problem was on me. I couldn't, if you're having business struggles, especially cash flow struggles, at a business of our size, you don't go out and raise cash for that. There's nothing to raise cash against. It's really just you. You have to figure it out. And so I kept thinking that, hey, we're going to fix our AR, we're going to fix our AP, we're going to catch up, it's going to be all right. And I kept thinking that January, February, March, by March, I realized that we weren't really going to pull ourselves ahead. There was just too much. We needed a cash infusion. And so I talked to my wife about it, and we decided that we were going to sell our home and just really go all in on this. And we owned a home in San Diego. Luckily, it had gone up a lot in value since the pandemic. And so we figured we would sell, tap as much equity as we could, and then put at least half of that into the business and really right the ship, really give us a chance to really be successful. And that's what we're doing right now. But then the very next question is, oh, well, where the hell are we going to live? And we weren't planning on moving to Portugal at the time, but we had been considering moving to Europe, for years. And we always figured it'd be a little bit later on. But when this kind of hit at the same time, we're like, well, we reached out to the Portuguese embassy. We tried to see what the residency would look like, and they had an opening. We made a quick decision, and we did it. So on March 1st, we decided to take a residency in Portugal. We spent 2 weeks selling everything we owned other than our home, packed up our bags, and flew to Portugal. And I've been operating the company remotely from here ever since. We did it I was only able to do that for a couple of reasons. One, because I felt like it was a necessity to be able to use the equity of our home to really right-size the ship in the business, because I really wanted to commit to it. And I wanted to be able to do it ourselves, like I said. But then the second thing is that I'd already been working remotely at least 60% of the week, every week. Like, I'd still come in the office. I was still swinging by different job sites. And those first few months, it was critical for me to be there, because with everything switching between insurances and bank accounts and just all the things that had to be physically done in person, which is insane how much there is to do, it was good for me to be there. But by the time March had showed up, I was largely running the business remotely already, just because San Diego's a big county. If I don't have to drive all the way across it every single day, then that's a good thing. And I'd already had a conversation with my GMs a couple times, and they're pretty independent guys, and we were very frank about it. I was like, look, you guys don't need me on site. I'm not a landscaper. I'm not going to help you dig this hole and build this wall. But what they need from me is to rebuild business operations, make it profitable, give them a steady flow of leads, and make sure they have enough money to buy supplies. That's all they care about. They just want to be left alone and be able to operate. And I want them to be able to do that. And so we started building out a largely remote team. I hired remote bookkeepers. I hired a remote customer service guy who does a lot of our lead gen. And there's only one person in the office today, and that's one of our admin ladies, who's in her 70s, has been there for 30 years. And the great thing about her is she physically picks up the mail every day and lets us know what's going on and answers some phones. But my goal is that by the end of this year, we won't have a physical office, because there's no need. Now, the only need is a yard to park our trucks, and all I need is like a piece of dirt with a fence around it. So that was kind of the rationale. And the other side effect, though, was that I wanted to make sure I was building a business that could succeed and wasn't reliant on me, because it's really, really tempting to jump in and like do the work yourself. Like, I was going on sales calls and doing all kinds of stuff. And I realized that if I dive too deep into every individual aspect of this business, I won't have my head above water to actually change anything and build it and keep it going. And by physically separating myself from the business, it was just one more hedge where I was like, look, I'm making it harder than it needs to be. But if we're successful, then this is the right outcome. Empowering GMs, empowering a team that can run without me, but at the same time, still molding it from the outside. So far it's working. So we'll see, but it wouldn't work without a couple of GMs that I really do trust.
Great. And then got another question. If you hadn't run into the 70-year-old, with the landscaping business, would you have continued searching in the same defense tech sectors, or were you already leaning towards expanding your search?
That's a good question. So my number one criteria was Southern California, because like I said, we owned a home in San Diego. We thought we would be in San Diego for 20 years. And a geographical constraint was really important for me. I love the idea of being in defense tech. I like to code. I've been in a lot of tech teams like that. And I probably would have kept looking in that sector. But the best thing about running into the 70-year-old landscaper is that it really opened my eyes to the fact that like you don't you in my opinion you should be industry agnostic at this point. I think you should be looking for, when I talk to searchers now, I tell them, I'm like, look, I had this realization, in probably October of 2022, where I realized like everybody is out there looking for like, the SaaS company with recurring revenue and no employee churn and, diverse customer base and like this perfect business that HBS says you're supposed to find, or like buy them bill is like, hey, go find this one. And those don't exist. And if they do exist, there's some PE group out there who's going to outbid you. So don't even try. So what I realized was, instead of looking for the perfect company in the perfect industry, what you should be looking for is all of those risks. And look through them, like whether it's customer risk, owner risk, supplier risk. Find the risks that you feel like you're uniquely capable to solve, and then go find companies that have that risk. That's what I think, because that's what you're going to be able to make a real value chain on. And so it doesn't really matter what the industry is, as long as you have employees who know what they're doing and that people you can trust, and you're never really going to be the guy who's like putting your hands in the dirt, unless you really want to be that guy. But that's not really me. But unless you want to be that guy, you really should be looking for the risk that you feel uniquely qualified to fix, and then go find that. And what I found was that I really wanted to tackle owner risk. I felt like it was a real tragedy that you have, especially in the trades, you have a lot of contractors who build up a decent little business. I mean, my seller, Craig, he was in his 70s. He'd been running this business since 1979, and he didn't even have accounting. Like, he didn't have any business operation whatsoever, and he pulled 1.2 million in revenue. That's amazing. That's really incredible. Been doing it for 40 years and had fantastic brand reputation, wonderful Google reviews, like really, really, really nice guy. And I thought it was such a destruction of value that his only outcome was that he was going to have to shut it down and his team would have to go find another job. Most of the team had been there, 20 years, and highly skilled guys, because in construction landscaping, you're never going to sell. There's no business. And so the only outcome is liquidation. And I thought that was a terrible outcome. And I felt like I just dove into what does owner risk look like? It looks like rebuilding a business completely from scratch around revenue. And I decided that was the risk I was going to take, and that's what I went for. So I would say find the risk that you think you can fix and bring value to, and go find a business that has that risk.
Wow, that's some great. That's great, like reframe of kind of how to approach search. A lot of great nuggets of wisdom in this. I think we're right at 8:15, so I know that you're up. I go to bed at like 9 p.m. So I don't even know how you're so awake and alert and just.
I still got a little bit of that jet lag on me, so don't worry about
it. That's awesome, man. I'll just kind of give you the floor if you have any kind of closing remarks. I know that you speak a lot about the if you follow you on Twitter or LinkedIn, you have a lot of great nuggets on kind of the veteran community and some of the things people transitioning. I don't know if there's anything you want to speak to, for some closing remarks, but kind of floor is yours, and then we'll close this up.
Yeah, I'll keep it short, but there's two things I'd like to touch on. One, if you're curious about buying a business, if you think ETA is for you, then I highly encourage you to go buy a business. Don't be one of those people who like searches for 2 years and doesn't find something. It's like you throw your hands up in the air and you're like, whatever. Because, and I take this from Tim Ferriss, I'm a big Tim Ferriss fan, but if you sit back and you really think about like, what is the fear? What is the fear that's holding you back? And really the ultimate fear is bankruptcy, right? It's complete failure. It's bankruptcy. It's missing out on your career progression, all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, like, it's really not a big risk. And I had this conversation with my wife before we decided to move this way. Like, when I left big tech, I was pulling a very, very good salary in very, very good companies. And I told her, I was like, look, I've got the experience, and this could all go to shit. And if it does, the worst case scenario, especially if we're taking our own cash, is that we're going to be out several $100,000 of our own money, and we're not rich. That sucks. But I'm going to learn a lot. I'm going to learn a hell of a lot about how a business operates, about whether or not this is the right move. And if it's not for me, then I'll know because I tried. And if it is for me and I fail, then I'm going to learn so much that I'm going to be able to crush it the next time, and I won't be a newbie. And if it all goes to shit, I mean, I can get a job with a defense contractor, so it's fine. You know, it's, I mean, I'll go do the GovCon thing. I've done that before. Like, you guys know what that's like. So it is what it is. And we're not going to be homeless, and we're not going to not have food. So we'll figure it out. So I would say that, if you think you can do it, then just go do it. Go figure it out. Like, figure out like what your risk tolerance is, and just remember that this is America. Like, there is no bankruptcy debtor jail. Like, you just do it, figure it out, and give it a shot. The second thing I would bring up is completely random. I'm gonna throw this in the chat, but I'm working with a friend, and we're trying to help. We're trying to help make a dent on veteran transition. As you guys all know, veteran transition sucks, and the information there is terrible. So we've got an idea to see if we can completely revamp what the veteran transition looks like. And what we mean is like bringing in actual experts, much like Charlie's done here with veteran ETA. But the idea is like just bring in experts, bring in guys who are and gals that have done it, within the last 5 years, and really just put together a community of people who understand like and help each other out. Whether it's personal finance, healthcare, VA loans. I don't know about you, but no one said shit to me about SBA 7A when I was transitioning out. So there's a lot of stuff in there that I didn't know. So we're just now getting the beta going. So if you click the link, we're going to do a couple like just sessions of information sessions. And the idea is to just get your feedback and see what's valuable, what's not valuable, and how we can make an impact and help some other veterans figure out like kind of fast track them a little way, as opposed to just all of us figuring out for ourselves. Because I've been out 5 years now, and if I knew then what I know now, I'd already be a millionaire. I don't know about you guys, but yeah, information's key.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, you can see the chat. People are saying exactly what I'm feeling. That was just incredibly inspiring. I'm fired up. I want to go buy a business right now. But thank you so much for your time, Jed. That was terrific, and we'll be sure to send out the Double Tap organization. That sounds like big stuff is in the on the horizon. So thank you again for your time, and look forward to continue watching you succeed. And thanks again, man.
Thanks. Well, success or failure, you'll hear about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks, Charlie.
Appreciate you a lot, man. Thanks. Take care.